Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, or whatever the case may be. My name is Marcus, and I am the host of the Black Brazil Today YouTube channel, as well as the blackbraziltoday.com blog, where I analyze Brazil from the perspective of race. So tonight I want to react to another part of this documentary that I discovered sometime last week. As I said, it's a short documentary. It's only about 30 minutes long or so, but there's just nuggets all throughout this documentary. I featured one a few days ago, and it brought into the question this idea of racial identity and how this one particular older black woman said that her daughter-in-law didn't like her black son and she didn't consider herself black. On the other hand, the woman still says she knows she's black. She just thinks she's white. Right. So this section that I'm going to react to today comes from another section in the video. Actually, this was the segment of the video that I actually saw first because somebody had cut the video up into little pieces. And as I said, this video was recorded, this documentary was recorded sometime in the late 80s. I'm not sure if it was exactly 1988 or 1989, but the reason I'm speaking on it is because it mentions a neighborhood in Sao Paulo that I've talked about previously. And it's just one of those things where, like, 1988, what's that, like 12, it's 36 years ago. The question being, what has changed in that neighborhood since then? So I just wanted to discuss it real quick, try to keep this video a little bit on the short side. So I'm calling today's video, in upper crust Sao Paulo neighborhood of Pinheiros, blacks aren't allowed because whites don't want them there. This this pales in the face when we think that, Brazil is a place that says we never had, racial segregation in the country. And while it is true, I haven't found any examples of there being any legalized segregation in Brazil. As I've made this point, years, for some time now, we don't have racial segregation laws in the United States anymore. South Africa is beyond, apartheid. But you go into these places in all three of these countries, and you still see like this strict difference between how the average black family lives, how the average white family lives. So, United States doesn't have racially segregated laws anymore, but yet segregation exists. Yet there's still inequality along race and class lines, right? So this is what I wanted to talk about in Sao Paulo. I lived in Sao Paulo for 9 years. I was familiar with Pinheiros. I would I had English classes with kids that lived in Pinheiros. So I remember quite well being around in Pinheiros. It's like, it's an upper crust, very wealthy type of neighborhood where you're just not going to find a whole lot of black people there. Anyway, before I get into more about this video, make sure you like this video, share this video, consider subscribing to the channel, click on the notification bell so you know when I put up new videos. And with that said, let's get directly into this video for today, after I put it into context, of course. So anyway, this is the lady that's talking in the section of the documentary that's called Raça na Praça. And the documentary is based in the, the Praça da Sé region of the neighborhood of Sé in Sao Paulo. It's I don't know if it's considered part of downtown or it's near downtown, but, anybody who's been to Sao Paulo has heard of this neighborhood. So this is where the documentary takes place. It looks like the guy recording the video and doing the interviews is just walking around and talking to, black children, teens, and black adults, around this region. So again, the reason why I wanted to discuss this is to talk about residential segregation in Brazil. No, it's not sanctioned by law, but even without laws, they managed to attain this type of segregation that you can definitely see along lines of color. Now, of course, class, salary, income, these all have something to do with it. But also coming along with it is what I've always said. You don't have to have segregationary laws for people to expect that that's the social aspect. People may not have to live by law, live in a certain neighborhood that says you can't live here, you can live here. But people in their attitudes show who they believe should live in a neighborhood and who should not. And anybody who's lived in the Pinheiros neighborhood or who has worked there, they know what it looks like in Pinheiros. There's a African American woman that I knew while I lived in Sao Paulo, and she sent an article to me just talking about her experiences living in Pinheiros as a Black American woman in Brazil. Again, discrimination without laws. There are Black Brazilians who've talked about being unwelcome in certain neighborhoods, or you guys don't belong here. What are you doing here? If you're not working here, what are you doing here? Obviously, you don't have the the income to be able to be a regular resident in this neighborhood. So what are you doing here? Um, Now we know that Brazil is a largely mixed population, but you go the higher up in society you go, the more upper crust neighborhoods, wherever you are in the country, it tends to have white or near white looking people in those upper crust neighborhoods. And in the lower neighborhoods, the lower class neighborhoods, you're going to have a majority of Black and brown people. This repeats itself throughout the country. Even in Black Bahia, where there's such a large Black population, when you go to the capital city of Salvador and you go to those upper crust neighborhoods, you're going to see mostly white populations or people who consider themselves or are close to white. Okay. So with that said, I want to talk about what is it that this young lady said in this interview in this particular part of the documentary. So right now, I'm going to just overdub what she said and then come back and put some more context on how she sees it. Where I work is a court of justice. Is there discrimination against Black people there? Quite a bit, quite a bit. Yes, there is. There are even buildings where Black people can't enter. Black people can buy the building and can't live there because the whites don't want them to. Yeah, the social clubs too. There are some that didn't even have it. Before, Black people didn't get in. They fought, and they got in. Now even the others have to be the same. Pinheiros doesn't allow Black people in either, right? And the others don't either. So we have to fight so that we can, because we're people just like the white people too. So anyway, you heard what that lady said. You heard what her opinion was of the situation in the neighborhood of Pinheiros in Sao Paulo, again, an upper crust neighborhood. Obviously there were no laws of segregation in Sao Paulo, not legally, but it was socially sanctioned. People didn't want Black people there. People of high influence and the elites they saw Black people coming and like, no, Black people don't come in here. So that's what's so sophisticated about how Brazilian racism used to work and how it still works. No, it doesn't have any law. So then people get the idea that because there's no segregatory laws that there must not be any type of racism in Brazil. But this is how the racism works. Now, she mentioned a couple of things here. Like she talked about, like she says, the clubs. Like you have social clubs, you have sports clubs in places like Pinheiros, upper crust neighborhoods, where it's like, okay, you Black people won't come in here. So there's a long history of how racism and racialized segregation works in Sao Paulo and other major cities of Brazil. It's just that you don't see the laws, so people assume everything is okay here. But this is why I wanted to go back and put some of this into context first. This is an article I refer to quite a bit. Journalist Isabella Barbosa was impeded from entering her own apartment in the Pinheiros district of Sao Paulo. She says, I was barred by two white men from entering my own house. It's like, it doesn't matter how much money I have, nor that I was well dressed. What mattered to them was the color of my skin. How could a neguinha live in the same building as me? Now, neguinha, some people would translate that depending on who says it and how it's said. You could like translate that as that little N-word girl, right? Like, the attitude is they saw this young woman coming. She's obviously got keys to get into the apartment building, but the men who were there just couldn't see that she could possibly live there. So, she wrote a whole story about this. I'm not going to go through the whole story, but this is basically what she was saying. Like, she's got key in hand. Like, what's the problem with you guys? Because they look at her and obviously they see a young Black woman. It's not possible that she could live in this apartment building, an upper crust neighborhood in Sao Paulo, right? Then the social clubs. In the 1960s, when Black Brazilians were barred from white clubs, the Aristocrata Club became the most luxurious Black club in Brazil. So it's the same thing. It says it's like if Black people want something and they're barred from the major society, the powerful society, the mainstream society, then you have to build your own. And this is what there was a documentary about the Aristocrata Clube in Sao Paulo, and some of the pictures you'll see from this club, it was just like, wow, black people created this for themselves where they could go and enjoy themselves, dress well, have something good to eat, dance to music. And, the place, look at this, you had uniforms for soccer teams, you had a swimming pool for the kids. And this was a well-recognized social club back in those days because, again, black people weren't allowed in the more sophisticated clubs that were, overwhelmingly or exclusively white. So you see, you have bands here, you have, black people wearing their finest attire, but being barred from white social clubs. So they created their own. So there's a long history of this in Brazil. One of these days, I'm going to have to do a story about this because you had these type of black social clubs in various cities around the country, whether it's Sao Paulo or Rio de Janeiro or Belo Horizonte. A lot of them have the same stories where black people sought refuge, sought places they could go when they were barred by mainstream white society. Here's if you Sarah Vaughan, the famous American jazz singer, appeared there. She sang there. This is a well-known Black Brazilian singer named Alaide Costa. She's like 88 now, if I'm not mistaken. She was one of the few Black women in the bossa nova music movement of the 1950s and 60s. So this is a story I'm going to have to follow up on. When Black Americans would come to Brazil, they would come to Sao Paulo or Rio, some of them would frequent these type of clubs. They wanted, top Black entertainers from the United States to have a place to hang out when they came to Brazil. And these are what these clubs were for. Again, where black people were barred, black Brazilians were barred from mainstream white society clubs, so they created their own. Now, this is an article from, let me see, what year is this? From 2018. What the racial map of Brazil reveals about segregation. African American woman shares her experience living in an upper crust neighborhood of Sao Paulo. So basically what this article is about is that the racial map, it reveals segregation in the country. You'll see these lower end. This is looks like either a lower class neighborhood or a favela. And then you have the upper crust apartments in Sao Paulo. It's almost like you can clearly see the segregation that goes on here. The more upper crust neighborhoods and then the lower class neighborhoods, right? See if I can find, here's a comparison of the most segregated cities in the US and Brazil. Okay, so this is Patricia Tribudo. I knew, I had only, met her a couple of times while I was in Sao Paulo, but she's lived in various places around the world. Paraguay, she's lived in Dubai. And so she sent me this article on her experience living in Pinheiros. She said, I currently live in a neighborhood in Sao Paulo where I could go a whole day and not see another Black person. If I do, I can count them on one hand. This is frustrating for me as an individual who precisely moved here to exist among a population that looks more like me. Now, of course, if you follow this channel regularly, you'll know that, I don't know, it's been about a week or two that I put up a video where this guy was talking about, he was asking a question, where are Blacks in nice neighborhood? The man says Brazil is the most segregated country in the Americas. From what I saw, the guy had experienced life in, different countries, and coming to Brazil, he just noticed that when he lived in a nice neighborhood, he just didn't see Black people at all there. It just kind of reiterates what I'm saying in this particular video. Like, the higher you go up in society, the fewer Black people you're going to see there. It's, you don't have to be an expert on race to be able to notice that. This is a story from, let me see, what year was this story? Might have been 2020. Black man raised $25,000 for champion gymnast fired due to racism. So this is a story about Angelo Assunção. I talked about this briefly, I think, in a video a couple of weeks ago. Angelo Assunção was an up-and-coming gymnast. He was a champion gymnast in Brazil. And he was one of Brazil's highest hopes in the area of men's gymnastics. He had won quite a few, medals in South American and Brazilian championships. He had won bronze in an international competition in Japan. He's a 6-time Brazilian champion, a 3-time South American champion. But he was the subject of a racist joke on the part of some white Brazilian or off-white Brazilian gymnast who made fun of him, made a joke in front of the camera that was clearly racist. Now, instead of the guys being punished for that, it was almost like the guy, Angelo Assunção, this guy right here, it was like he made a fuss about it. Like, look at what these guys said. They posted this video on social networks and, basically humiliated me. But it seems like Angelo Assunção was the one who got punished. He was he used to train at the Pinheiros Sports Club. Again, we're talking about Pinheiros, where you need a scholarship to be able to, train there. So he was one of Brazil's top athletes in gymnastics. And as we can see, the Olympics in France just ended up ending. I guess it's been a couple of months now. But arguably, Angelo Assunção should have been there, but where has he been? He's basically lost his career because of some racist incidents that he experienced, not only at the hands of his teammates, but he lost his scholarship to train at the Pinheiro Sports Club. So a few years ago, some black men banded together to do a fundraiser for him so he could continue to train. I don't know what happened to Angelo Assunção, but he got a reputation, and they just kind of like blackballed him. Let me see here. At the age of 24, Angelo, a Sao Paulo native, one of the greatest talents that Brazilian gymnastics has produced in recent years, faced a series of racist episodes, and the most recent culminated in his dismissal from the Pinheiros Athletic Club, where he had been training since he was 8 years old. That is, for 10 months, Angelo Assunção, who was part of the Brazilian team until 2015, has nowhere to train. So because he's been basically blackballed, no other sports club will take him in to allow him to train. I mean, it's unfortunate because what I'm saying is, how many medals would this guy have won if he had participated in France? He's got a number of medals in world, Brazilian and South American championships, but I have to follow up and see where this guy is now because, obviously he should have been in France. I don't know how long he's gone without training now, but he was one of Brazil's top hopes in terms of male gymnastics. And because of the issue of race, he's been blackballed. His name has been dirty. And now I have no idea what Angelo Assunção is. But this is what I'm saying, and again, this has something to do with Pinheiros because it's the Pinheiros Sports Club where he was training. It takes a lot of money to train there. Elite families send their kids to these sports clubs where you need a lot of money to be able to live there and to be able to train at this particular sports facility. Whereas Angelo Assunção, I'm going to have to look for him now. But as we know, Rebecca Andrade became a top name when she challenged Simone Biles in the Olympics in France. And just from what I've seen of Angelo Assunção, he would have been the male version of Rebecca Andrade. So, to lose your position because of some politics, Anyway, that's in the Pinheiro Sports Club. Okay, these are more stories about Black experiences in upper crust neighborhoods. Black people in upper crust neighborhoods in Brazil, whether they're just passing through or they happen to live there, they're always going to be, suspicious. People are going to look at them with a suspicious look. Outrage against apartheid continues. Upper crust shopping malls are not the place for young Black teens. Brazilian apartheid rears its ugly head again. Military police screen and harass Black youth from entering an upper crust shopping mall. So, the stories go on and on. Like, it's just Brazil has this attitude, like, what are you guys doing here? You go back to the favela where you came from, the slums, what they're saying. So then outlining for death, white, Black areas, and redlining of Brazilian cities. We can't say that official redlining happened in Brazil, but as I'm saying, in the same way that you don't have legally sanctioned segregatory laws in Brazil, you still see this type of redlining that goes on where this part of this city belongs to those who have means, with mostly white people, and the rest of it is for everybody else who can't afford it. So another great article here, something to take a look at, because it just gives you a stark reality of what it's like living in Brazil, whether you live in a richer neighborhood or a poorer neighborhood. You'll see military police going through poor neighborhoods in places like Rio de Janeiro as if they're in a war. How do you police people in a poor neighborhood with, how would you feel if you saw police strolling through your neighborhood dressed up as if they were at war with these huge tanks coming through your neighborhood? They don't do that in upper class, almost exclusively white neighborhoods in Brazil. So yeah, no legalized segregation, but they act as if there is legalized segregation. It's quite clear if you visit some of the major cities in Brazil. Laws to produce racial segregation, the experiences of a Black journalist. So the stories go on and on. That's why I wanted to talk about this today, because we're talking about, we're in 2024 now, but this documentary from 1988 might as well have been recorded recently. When people tend to run into these stark differences, they come to understand who they are and how society sees them. The story I like to tell often, there was a a black male that I knew when I was living in Sao Paulo. He was probably about my same complexion. His wife was a very fair-skinned woman, and just as I'm accustomed to running into, I could look at his wife and see that she was of African ancestry, but she was just very fair, had like green eyes. And I was just expecting that his wife would have proclaimed herself to be white or mixed. But the husband told me, he was like, no, my wife is black. She sees herself as black. And I wondered, well, you know, most women who look like her in Sao Paulo or in Brazil in general probably won't, of course there are some, but a lot will try to say that they're white or at least, maybe at the least, mixed, mestizo. And he says, well, my wife's mother worked in the Pinheiros neighborhood and around all of those, upper crust, wealthy white people, the light-skinned daughter came to understand and she came to understand that even though she was fair-skinned, in area upper crust, mostly white neighborhoods like Pinheiros, they're going to make sure that like, yeah, you might be fair skinned, but you're not white. And so that stark reality struck her, and she understood that she was black as fair as she was. So this is just how race works in Brazil. And what I'm saying about stories like the one I just told is that it's only been in recent years that this type of consciousness has hit people, because years ago, people who were fair skinned would just be like, no, I'm just white. And they would never had that experience or that consciousness that shows them like, well, white people don't necessarily see you as white when you're in their neighborhoods. So this is something that's changed in the last 20 to, I'll say 15, the last 20 years, where black people of all different types of colors, I spoke about this in the last video, are starting to come to see themselves according to how society labels them. And they're saying like, okay, I can't accept myself as just mestizo or pardo, both meaning brown or mixed. When the rest of society, when I go into upper crust white neighborhoods, they let me know that I'm not one of them. So anyway, again, name of this documentary that I took this from was from 1988 or 1989. It was called Raça na Praça. And just very revealing. 36 years later, this documentary shows that not a lot has changed. In Brazil, you still go to upper crust neighborhoods, you're going to see mostly white or near white people. So anyway, what do you think about today's video? Drop a comment in the comment section, like this video, share this video. Consider subscribing to the channel. You click on that notification bell so that you know I put up a new video. With that said, I'm going to end this video here and request that you all come back. Check out the next video that I post here at Black Brazil Today.